Thank you. As she said, I'm Danielle Cox. I'm the pastor of First Christian Church in Texas City, which is in the wonderful Southwest region. And we're no stranger to hurricanes. As my church was preparing, as we heard Harvey was coming, we had this big debate about whether or not we canceled church. Do we cancel church on Sunday? And finally, my elders and I came to this agreement that was, we will cancel church, but with a contingency that we'll have a communion service if the weather's not as bad as we think it's going to be. And on Saturday, as Harvey was making landfall over in Aransas Pass and they were getting the brunt of it, we didn't feel much where we were. It was really calm. And I started to think, oh no, we have prematurely canceled church. But as the rains came and they didn't stop coming, we realized that no one was able to make it to church. And in fact, several members of my own congregation flooded that very first night. I don't think anyone was quite prepared for what Hurricane Harvey would bring, but as this was all happening and I was trapped in my house because there was water all around, I was in contact with Disciples Volunteering, Josh Baird. I was in contact with Caroline Hamilton Arnold from Week of Compassion, and I knew that I wanted my church to be a part of recovery. I didn't know if our building could handle that yet because I didn't know what the damage might be, but I knew that this is where we wanted to be. We wanted to be on the front lines of helping our neighbors recover. The story of the mission station that is in my church goes back to 2008 and Hurricane Ike. And Hurricane Ike, the church lost the roof over our education building, and it was in that time when they were repairing their building that Disciples Volunteering and Disciples Home Missions came in and helped the congregation repair and then helped them figure out how they might be a part of recovery. So our mission station has 3 showers. It has 2 bunk rooms that can accommodate up to 24 people. And for about 3 years, my church, 10 years ago, was involved in that recovery process. But after recovery wound up and the volunteers stopped coming, they had the foresight not to dismantle those bunk beds and to take out those showers, which some churches do once that time has come because they want that classroom space back. My church said we want to be a place people can come and serve, and during the interim between Ike and Hurricane Harvey, we had scout groups, we had pastors' retreats, we had all kinds of different service trips where people were staying in the mission station. And so I knew we were ready and equipped when Hurricane Harvey happened. So in that time, in 2 years, we have hosted over 500 volunteers who have completed over 20,000 hours of work in our community towards Hurricane Harvey recovery. Most of our groups have been disciples groups who come with Disciples Volunteering. Some of our groups have been from other denominations that our church has gotten connected with as we've been in the recovery process. Because we didn't just host people in our building, myself and others in our congregation got involved in local recovery. So I've learned so much about what recovery looks like in this country, but basically after a disaster, something called a long-term recovery group starts to form. And these are the players in your community. And for us, it was Galveston County. So we had elected officials, we had churches, social service agencies, other nonprofits, we had mental health services. There were all the people, all the players in our county kind of came together and started meeting together behind the scenes and saying, while the mucking and gutting is happening and while those big name groups that come in and do the mucking and gutting are doing what they're doing, we are trying to figure out the road forward, because long-term recovery is 6 months beyond. They say 6 months to 24 months, but we know that it will be years before our county is fully recovered from Hurricane Harvey. We know that there are about 8,000 families still in need of having their homes repaired in my county alone, and there are actually over 40 counties in the disaster declaration area of Hurricane Harvey. So it is a large, large disaster. So I went to meetings, sometimes kind of boring, tedious meetings where you sit and hear all these things going on. But we're hearing about, as we're preparing and thinking several months in, we're thinking, okay, what are the mental health needs going to be in our community when people have endured such kind of trauma? Preparing for volunteers to come from far away and from nearby to help people continue to repair. And we built relationships with other churches that didn't really exist before. And so throughout that process, we have met lots of people along the way. We met other mission groups from other denominations who came. We worked with Reach Beyond Mission, who came in to work specifically with youth groups in collaboration with Disciples Volunteering. We had a long-term volunteer from Disciples Volunteering, Steve Houston, come and basically move into our church and agree to greet and welcome volunteers to help the work on the ground and to network in ways that I couldn't because I was also pastoring. And so we have just continued that work for the past 2 years. So hurricane disaster recovery, there have been so many disasters in our news just in the last couple of months, and it is really easy for us to have kind of disaster amnesia or even disaster fatigue because these other disasters keep coming. And really, what I'm hoping that people take away from what I have to say about my church's experience is that any church could do what we do. I have learned through this process, Steve Houston has assured me that if you have a toilet, you could take it out and put in a shower. So you want a shower in your church for mission groups to shower, you can do that. You can put in bunk beds, you can use air mattresses. But disasters happen and we can't always prepare for them, but we can prepare for how the church is going to respond. In the greater Houston area, there was some criticism of some bigger name churches that were not prepared to welcome people in to their churches. They didn't have a disaster plan in place. But I think Disciples churches can really position themselves to do that. Like I said, there was water all around, and I knew that people were going to come and to be with us if we could do it. The other thing that I hope people take away is that after a disaster, there's so much going on. There's just, it's chaos. It's chaos. I was responding to the needs of my congregation. There were other churches in the greater Houston area and across the southeast Texas coast that flooded. And I felt a little guilty because I heard about churches that were taking donations and that were opening their churches to be shelters, and my church wasn't doing that. And I felt really guilty about that. But what I've learned through experience is that God has a purpose for each church, and sometimes it's to open your doors at the beginning, and sometimes it's to keep your doors open until the very, very end. And I know that 2 years later, when I go into people's homes, when I'm with the volunteers, that 2 years later, they feel really forgotten. There's been lots of disasters, but there's so much need still, and when volunteers come, the kind of hope that they bring. So I hope the third thing you'll take away is if you are not going to be a disaster recovery station and you're not going to prepare for those things, I hope that you think about ways that your church can go and serve in one of the several disaster recovery stations Disciples Volunteering has open right now. We have mine in Texas City. There is work going on in North Carolina. There is work going on in Puerto Rico, and they're always adapting to what's going on. There may be more that are emerging. And so for churches wanting to take groups, I always tell people, what kind of group should you take on this mission trip? Bring your youngest, bring your oldest, bring everyone in between, because that's what the kingdom of God looks like, people serving beside each other. Youth mission trips have a particular purpose, but I think especially in disaster recovery, you want everyone serving together. Those youth are learning amazing things from the older adults in your congregation, and they're working together, and they're doing amazing things. If you don't have skills right now and you want to in the future serve, Home Depot and other stores offer these classes for free that you can go take and learn how to do all kinds of things. So there's, not a disaster right now that you can respond to, or you don't feel like your church can go right now. Well, you can be doing the prep work to prepare to go. So I just want to thank you guys again for this time to speak, and I invite you to stop by our booth. We have buttons and all kinds of information. The work that we do would not be possible without Week of Compassion. I can't say it enough. Week of Compassion is such an amazing asset and partner to the disciples. I mentioned I have members of my congregation who flooded. I had checks for solidarity grants in hand for them by the Sunday after Harvey. And it was an amazing experience to be able to give that to people who had flooded and say, you're not alone and your fellow disciples are with you. So we could not do this work without Week of Compassion. We also could not do this work without disciples volunteering, because as a solo pastor, I definitely can't do this work alone, and without long-term volunteers like Steve Houston, who come and help take that load off of me a little bit so they can focus on the recovery and I can focus on being a pastor. Josh Baird's work is invaluable, going to visit and do the prep work for these mission stations, and they are a great resource. If a disaster happens and you're trying to figure out what the next steps are, always talk to Josh, because he will figure out where you might go, and it might not be a disaster that is in the news cycle that week, because there might be a disaster from 2 years ago, like Hurricane Harvey, that can still really use your help. So thank you again, and stop by our booth.